is an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Unspoiled, covering His Dark Materials, Book 3, The Amber Spyglass, Chapters 31, 32, and 33. Authorities End, Mourning, and Marzipan. In these chapters, God dies, but it's nowhere near as interesting as Mary's history with a flavor of cake. Welcome to Unspoiled.
It's not cake, it's a paste.
Yeah, well, it goes on cake. Don't split hairs with me.
I mean, it does go on cake sometimes. Not always. You can eat it by itself. I ate it by itself at Christmas time this year.
Yeah.
It's really good.
I don't like that texture.
It's
very waxy.
It's a little waxy when you first bite into it, but then it starts to soften. It's sort of like
you can just chew on it, kind of.
Yeah. But it reminds me a little bit of like a hard caramel. When you first bite it and you're like, why would I do this? And then all of a sudden you're like, oh. And then it's really good. Welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Natasha.
And I'm Owen.
I like caramel and marzipan.
I think they're okay. I'm more of a Haribo raspberries kind of guy.
Yeah, talk about textures.
Yeah, that's a weird... That's one that I'm like, yeah, I love this, and I get why other people don't like this.
Yeah.
And that works out good for me because it means no one eats my fucking candy.
So yeah, these 3 chapters, man.
Yeah.
What'd you think? A lot happening.
We almost didn't do 3 this time. We almost only did the first 2. And I'm glad we did the 3 because I found the first one, Authorities End, to be a little bit underwhelming.
Okay.
And then 2, the one after that, Morning, not a lot happens. It's just kind of set up and some people getting caught up to speed and resting and all of that. And then this 3rd chapter blew me away. I thought it was really good.
Okay.
Maybe the best. No, not the best chapter because we had all that stuff in the underworld that was so good.
Yeah, that was really good.
But this is also really good. And I think it's a good little microcosm of what the different kinds of chapters can be in this book. At least in regards to how I feel about them. I'm not as crazy about Philip Pullman's big crazy wars and like the actual conflicts. I'm not always happy with how those go through.
Okay.
And I can be a little bored sometime of just the like setup. But then when it comes to like the actual themes that he's trying to explore with like religion and how people deal with that, when he does get to them, I think they're fucking amazing.
Okay.
So overall, like I was really happy with this section.
All right, cool.
And that's not to say that interesting things don't happen in Authorities End. It just wasn't quite like, especially after that cliffhanger in the previous chapter, being like, oh shit, God is being mugged by jackals. he's stuck in his limo being throttled by hooligans, and the gang has just ran into him. Am I too close to the mic?
You're going off a little bit when you talk loudly, so I just wanted to pull the mic back a little bit from you.
Sorry if I'm super loud. That was just like a crazy thing to end on, and then they're like, no, they beat the jackals, and they save God, and God is crazy. And
you keep calling them jackals. It's cliffghasts.
I know.
That's not a jackal. It's not even close to a jackal. They have wings.
I guess that's true. But yeah, crazy monster... scary things.
Yeah.
And
I picture them as like pterodactyls, but like with like human features.
Yeah. They beat those, and then the fight with we still don't know how that fight actually ended up.
With Metatron?
With Metatron. Like we're pretty sure that they tackled him and fell down a bottomless pit, but that's not exactly satisfying. Yeah,
agreed. It's like so I've been trying to struggle with how to like articulate this because I feel like Philip Pullman sometimes doesn't really know whether he wants things to be a fairy tale or a real story. Mm-hmm. So he can be weirdly adult and realistic at times, and then he will do things like have Mrs. Coulter basically have magic powers. So, and you know, like part of me gets annoyed, and then another part of me is like, well, it's fine. And I kind of go back and forth with him as he decides what he wants to do. You know what I mean?
I think his world building, in some places it's super strong. Like, especially the underworld chapters. Like, that's all super interesting, creative, pretty original ideas, or at least a very cool take on things. But I almost think that is just kind of given a very half-hearted sort of thing. It's not his focus in what he wanted to accomplish with these books. Yeah. I feel like Philip Pullman, grew up and became an educated adult and, rejected religion and had very specific thoughts on those. And then he reread the childhood classics of C.S. Lewis that he had enjoyed as a kid. And after he finished the last book, he lit a cigarette and said, man, fuck that. I'll make my own, and it'll be less bullshit. It'll be about how I think about religion. Okay. And that's the attitude I think he took when he came into this book. And that's why I think, those actual, core ideas are so strong. And, his other stuff is a little more hit and miss because that's not what he's thinking about. I don't think that's what drives him as much.
It's really funny that you are taking this position because earlier today, I had gotten an email like, hey, you let us know on Goodreads that you finished The Girl with All the Gifts and see your profile. And I was like, oh, I forgot about Goodreads. Okay. And I clicked on it, and then I saw the Amber Spyglass, in the sidebar. And I saw it had a 2.5-star review, or 2 out of 5.
By Goodreads as a whole or by you?
Goodreads as a whole.
Okay.
And all of the top reviews were like, the plot here is a mess. He doesn't know what he wants to do. All this is a vehicle for him to talk about religion being garbage. Right. And if that's what he wants, then fine, but try and make a plot that is sound around that, and he just doesn't, and all of a sudden God's dead and okay. So it's kind of funny because you're taking the exact opposite, where you're just well, that's the good part, which right. It seems like everybody else was kind of annoyed by.
I feel like in the end, that's why I don't go on Goodreads anymore, is because I would have a very hard time assigning a number to these books. I don't think that's all. I feel like focusing on what number of stars you're going to give something is a little reductive.
But that's not what I'm doing. I'm talking about what they said.
No, I'm not. I'm agreeing with you, and I understand that. But I think it's much more about how much you value those ideas, much more than trying to assign a comprehensive score to something. Because I will probably never reread these books, but I think I will enjoy them a lot more thinking back on them and thinking about the ideas in them than I ever will be, than I was when I was reading them. I tend to find these a little bit of a slog to get through sometimes. And then I'm reading this last chapter and I'm just going through it. Just holy shit, this is super interesting. Yeah.
Okay. So we start off with Metatron being lured down into the cavern near the abyss, where Lord Asriel is apparently waiting, he knows Mrs. Coulter is coming.
Well, I think this was the plan. I think this was the plan that Mrs. Coulter and he made back in the castle.
Okay.
Even. They're we got to kill Metatron. There's a hole or something. We'll throw him down the holes. I don't think it was very well, because they talk about how they have to get rid of Metatron, and then they talk about
Lyra
whether or not they love Lyra, and
right.
Why weren't they always loving Lyra, and why didn't they get married, and why weren't they getting married to Lyra, and just it's but yeah, I think this was their plan, because she goes down there and she's like, oh hey, we're doing the thing.
Yeah.
And they have their melodrama moment, and it doesn't completely work for me.
Yeah, that's fair.
These two characters never completely worked for me. I guess I always regarded them with such suspicion. I never trusted their motives fully, to the point where now when it turns out that they're no, we will sacrifice ourselves for the good of Lyra, I'm well, not only is that not what I expected, it makes you less interesting, I feel like.
Okay.
In a way.
Yeah, I see that.
I wish there had been a little bit, I don't know. And we've talked at length about how I I've never trusted Mrs. Coulter or thought for a moment that she actually cared about Lyra. And that being the case, I feel like it almost wasn't earned that she did. Like, it seemed to really come out of nowhere.
That was one of the criticisms that in that like review that I was talking about. I'm just talking about that one specific review because it had the most upvotes out of any, so it was like at the top of the pile. But
Right.
just that all of a sudden she seems to care about Lyra, and you're like, where did that come from?
Yeah.
And I feel like he's trying to lampshade it here by having her be like, I don't know where it came from when she's talking to Lord Asriel, but it does feel really easy. Like, you can't just be like, oh, plot hole, let me have the character address it, and now it's fine. Like, that's not how that works.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I understand that.
Okay, well, I'm glad it's not just me, because I feel like I've been bitching about her a lot throughout this entire podcast, basically, at least for this book. Mm-hmm. And, yeah, it looks like she jumped off a cliff to pull Metatron down.
Yeah.
And that's pretty cool, I guess.
Yeah. So do you think that they all went down, or what do you think happened?
The way they just, like, cut off there, maybe not.
So do you think that, like, her and Asriel went down and Metatron got out, or, like, what do you think happened?
Maybe. I just don't know. I feel like it's almost deliberately we're not really going to tell you.
Okay.
So to even speculate, like, is kind of hard for me to do. I could see it going one way or the other. Either, yeah, she took down Metatron, and maybe now it's a different angel calling the shots.
Okay.
Or something. And also, like, if they did kill Metatron, I assumed, I guess, that this was all going to end with the armies of heaven being defeated. But if that's the case, then the armies of heaven are, I guess, still sort of around, but they're kind of leaderless. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel like there's a good bad guy for the last couple of chapters. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's just about her stopping the dust from falling into black holes.
Yeah.
But I'm not really sure. There's very little left to go. I think there's only I think there's 5 chapters left.
So they go, she jumps, and that's the end of that. And then we go to Lyra and Will, who are trying to get to their demons still. And they get some help from a bunch of the Galavespians showing up.
Well, God died.
Don't
forget about God.
God died, right.
It's very anticlimactic. Mm-hmm. Like, it was such an interesting idea that God wasn't the creator. He's just a higher level of being that tricked everyone into thinking he was God. Mm-hmm. And then he went crazy, and then another powerful angel, like, usurped his position, sort of, and now God is just a crazy old man in a basement. That's an interesting idea, and it's interesting that he was this terrible thing that became who has reverted to having the mind of a child. Those are all really interesting ideas that they just, in the end, they're just kind of like, yeah, and then they saved him, but it didn't matter because he just, like, drifted away like everything else does. And
that's what I kind of liked about it, is that it's anticlimactic. Like, it's not, because he's not God. So the fact that he just dissolves, he just has the same kind of fate as anything would, because he is just the same.
I think you could have done something interesting with it, but because the characters that save him and bring him out and are with him in his last moments don't even know who he is, and that's kind of poetic in a way, but there needs to be a little extra gravy, I feel like, to make it feel like there's gravity to it.
Okay.
I feel. I'm rewatching The Sopranos, and I'm rewatching it, and kind of like, if I don't remember something and want to remember what happens later, I'll go on YouTube and watch a later clip just to kind of appreciate it more. And some spoilers for Sopranos, so skip ahead a couple minutes if you haven't watched that show and don't want to be spoiled on it. In the last episode, Tony's Uncle Junior, he goes to visit him in a nursing home, and he doesn't recognize Tony. Mm-hmm. And he can sort of converse and still be himself, but he's confused and has to be told that he's his nephew and that he used to be a mobster. He doesn't remember any of that. And it's a really great fucking scene, because right now I'm rewatching seasons 1 and 2 where Junior had tried to kill Tony, and later on he's confused and shoots Tony. All this stuff has happened between these characters, and then in that last scene between the two of them, he's confused and doesn't know what's happening, and Tony still hates this old man for the terrible things that he's done, and he's also really, really sad because this person who meant a lot to him and that he used to love and all of this, just he's not himself anymore, and that relationship is meaningless. It's a great scene, and I feel like it's almost similar to what's happening here. You could do something really interesting with it.
But the difference is that God doesn't mean anything to Lyra.
Right.
She wasn't brought up with a religious background. She doesn't know who he is when she goes to that box. I think that's part of it, is the anonymity of it.
Yeah.
That she just offers him a hand because she sees him being like attacked, and he recoils at first, being afraid. And then when he realizes that she's trying to help, he's like, oh, okay. And then like laughs with joy at dissolving because he's so tired.
Right.
Which is kind of great, I think. Like, I get what you mean, but I really like that ending. Like, God being like, you know what? I'm really done. Like, I am super done. I've been done, and he just been keeping me in this crystal box to keep me from being done.
Right.
And her unwittingly being the person to, like, give him rest, you know, without any added significance to it of knowing who he is or what he represents, because that's just, you know, who she is. Just she helps people when she comes across them. She doesn't let Will kill that little animal that's like outside the world of the dead that's injured. Remember? I think it's Will who was like, well, why don't we just kill it and put it out of its misery? And she's like, how do you know it wants to be put out of its misery? Maybe it likes being alive. Like, yeah,
that's a good one.
So I feel like it's kind of similar to that she's just always sort of like stepping in for people. So yeah, I get what you mean, but I kind of liked it because of the fact that it's like, she may never know what that was, you know, and it really doesn't matter if she knows.
Yeah,
but
I almost wish there was just a little bit of more build up or something. I'll tell you what would have really been interesting is if it had been Mary.
Mary has too much baggage with it.
But in the moment, she still wouldn't have known what was happening, and she wouldn't have maybe figured it out until later.
I don't know. Mary's a smart cookie. I think she would have sensed something was going on. All these other angels are just flying around, and here goes this one inside of a crystal box that's been like separated from everyone. I bet she would sense something. But
I don't know. I tend to think most things in this book would be more interesting if it was Mary doing it.
That's fair.
Reading this last chapter, I'm like, oh, right, Mary's like the best fucking character in this book, and it should be about her.
But it can't be.
Yeah, I guess not. But she's way more three-dimensional. Maybe not even three-dimensional. She just has more personality to me for some reason. I don't know. We'll get there.
Okay.
But, yeah, God dissolves, and it's interesting, but... Well, we've discussed this.
Yeah, I was like, are we doing this again? So then the Galavespians show up, and they help take out a bunch of dudes riding wolves.
Are these the guys? They're wolf demons. Are they riding the wolves?
Oh, okay,
right.
They're the wolf demons. Yeah, these the Tartars.
Yeah, these are the guys from book 1, I'm pretty sure.
And then...
Yeah, they fuck those dudes up.
Yeah, they do. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Like these little dudes with their spurs. And they're still trying to get to Pan, and they come out into this area where there is the fight with the ghosts going on, and also Yorick Burnison comes like charging in, because there are a bunch of people on horseback that are like throwing nets and fucking shit up. Yorick gets caught in a net, and it has to be Will that like goes in and slices the net up with the knife and like frees him, and then Yorick runs into Lee Scoresby.
Yeah.
And it's so cute, and I love them.
And also, Yorick fucks up some horses, which is pretty cool.
Right.
Because horses are jerks.
They are not jerks.
They kick your head right off as soon as they look at you.
They would.
Yeah.
But not all horses, hashtag.
It's very hard for me to think of like terrible things happening to horses without thinking of the Game of Thrones episode we just watched.
Yeah, no spoilers, but yeah.
No spoilers, but Jesus Christ.
And they finally get to their demons, and then Will cuts a hole into another dimension, and Lee Scoresby goes out through it and is like, oh, this is just like home. And then he dissolves. And Will and Lyra tumble through, and their demons apparently disappear, but
Does it say that?
they don't know where they went.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they're still in denial and thinking that they're running around in the Mulefa world. But I'm thinking, yeah, they dissolved and they're just part of the ether. And because they're in that world, they feel like they're around.
Okay, gotcha.
That's what I'm thinking is happening. Because they are, thinking that they're whole.
Yeah.
Or they absorbed into each other, because they also talk about how Will took Pantalaimon and Lyra took Will's demon.
Yeah, both of the demons looked almost identical, like in the heat of battle. So they each just grab one up, and then he realizes that he's like holding Lyra's and she has his.
And I think they're going to make this into some weird, now we're soulmates because we've bonded on this spiritual level. And I'm not really here for it.
Okay. All right.
I'm, they're kind of cute together, but, I have no investment in them. And they're, they're 12-year-old kids.
Yeah.
And it feels weird to read about.
Yeah, that's fair.
But yeah, they escape into the Mulefa world, and the ghosts all break up and dissolve.
Yep.
In the way that I speculated on in the last episode. How they're just keeping themselves together through sheer force of will.
Oh,
and after
okay,
the
yeah.
kids get their demons and escape, they're just okay, finally.
I can
It's
rest.
It's like when you undo your pants on Thanksgiving Day after dinner.
So they fall asleep, and by the time they wake up and take a little bath in a pool of water that's nearby and whatnot, the Mulefa show up. And she uses the alethiometer really quick to double check that they're friendly. But not only are they friendly, they've learned to talk a little bit. So they come and are like, hey, your friend Mary is here. Come to Mary. And she's like, oh, shit, okay.
I think I said this. Do they show up at the beginning of this book or the end of last book?
I think the beginning of this book. I don't remember.
I think you're right. Because, Mary goes off alone at the end of the last book.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think I talked about this then. I would be freaked out by these things.
Oh, yeah.
They sound so alien and spooky looking, but also, now that we've gotten to know them, and based on their creepy designs, but they're not sinister.
No.
So it's really funny to me to think of Lyra opening up the alethiometer. Are they friendly? And they're like, no, they're fucked up. They'll kill you. And then they've just got a gun. It's just the idea. And I have only a half-formed mental image of what these things could even look like. You showed me a picture of an artist rendering, and even that I'm just I can't take this into my brain. It's so weird.
Yeah. Yeah, the diamond-shaped legs, and the fact that a lot of the birds are shaped that way too, with the wings in the front and back instead.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they take them down to Mary, and they have an awesome ride on their way down.
Yeah.
And then they basically eat a little bit and then pass the fuck out.
Which is sensible.
Yes. And when they wake up, Mary's like, all right, so I want to know everything that's going on with you guys, but we need to do some work in the meantime. And they're about to do that when a bunch of Mulefa show up, and they're like, Mary, can you come with us to see this really weird thing, please?
I really feel bad for Mary on this. Mary is such a nice person that she's just oh yes, of course. But for me, I just think of my employees calling me and being like, hey, this paper towel dispenser's not working. Can you come and fix it and look at it? And being like, Jesus, can you people do anything? Mm-hmm. You and your weird wheels, and your lack of fingers. I guess I'll just come up there and look at it with my fucking fingers.
Look at it with my fingers. So I was expecting it to be a bunch of dead Tualapi shot.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be Father Gomez with an army of geese.
Yeah,
it was going to be some sort of trap.
But as it turns out, it's just that window with all these ghosts coming out of it.
Yeah, they're like, look at all these ghosts.
And she's like, what the fuck? But they all look really happy.
Yeah.
And then there's one old woman that comes up to her and says, tell them stories and all will be well. Just tell them stories. And she's like, okay.
Tell who stories?
I mean, the kids. What?
I thought she was referring to the fact that you have to tell the harpies stories in order to get taken through the underworld into real life again to dissolve and become one with the earth.
Ah, maybe that is what she was talking about.
But I'm saying, like, from Mary's position, she's like, what? These? How do you know about these guys that I need to tell stories to?
So she goes back to the village and they work on repairing nets and like collecting fish and all this stuff throughout the day.
Yeah. Will and Lyra were in Lyra's head for a while, and she's having her feelings, her flutterings in her girlish heart towards Will.
We don't really get that until Mary's starting to like tell her story, though.
We get that some with her being like, I used to swim naked in the river all the time, but it wouldn't be the same with Will were here.
Yeah, she's like, no, I'm not doing that now. So they tell her as much as they can about their story, and then Mary, they ask her about what happened to make her stop being a nun. And when she describes it, she's like, I wasn't in a habit. I wasn't cloistered away somewhere. We were out in the world. In fact, I worked still in like particle physics, and I just had to wear sober clothing and a crucifix. But I was sent on this like event basically to present a paper that I had written. And I was sitting across from this guy at this dinner afterward. And I almost didn't go to the dinner. I was almost just going to go back to my room. And then I was like, I feel great. I had a good presentation. People who are respected in the field liked my work, and I want to go to this dinner. And she goes, and the guy is sitting across from her, and they just get along really well. And then somebody hands her this piece of marzipan, which is something that she ate the night that she like had her first love with this boy in her school that she was at a dance with.
Yeah. He fed her some marzipan, all sexy like.
Yeah. So the taste of it reminds her of how she felt as a young girl with this boy that she saw for a little bit before his family moved away, and realizes that she has just basically, by becoming a nun, agreed that she will never feel that way again, that's off limits.
Yeah, she makes this analogy to it being like China, where you're like, yeah, I'm sure it's really cool, but there's all this other stuff, and I don't have to care about that. Like, there's all this other stuff, and that means that I don't want it. Like, it's one thing to be like, okay, I legitimately don't have an interest in that, but telling yourself that you don't care about that, and then you meet someone from China, and then you find out that, no, you've been to China before, remember? And it was fucking awesome. Yeah. And you're just telling yourself that you don't care about China, but China, pretty bomb. And there were a couple of things I had on and off feelings about this, because the one thing she was like, what good will it do anyone if I continue to be miserable and deny myself? Will that do me any good? Will that do anyone any good? No. And that I get. But then she's like, and then it felt like God had died. And I'm like, wait, why is that what happens? That leap I do not understand. Not wanting to be a nun and straight up not believing in God anymore are not the same thing. But it feels like they completely go together for her. Do you get me? I do. But on the other hand, I understand the idea that once you realize that your faith didn't mean you had to be a certain way the way you thought it did, all that other stuff can go away real fast.
Okay, but I just wish that she talked about it that way.
I can see that.
Instead, she's just like, I don't know if God died or if God went away or what happened, and she makes it sound like it's this door that just slammed out of nowhere. And a crisis of faith, I've always felt, is the whole deal is this uncertainty, because going from knowing, believing deeply to absolutely nothing, that's a really abrupt shift. And I don't know. It's just, it felt, that was the one part of her story that I was like, wait a second, why is it either or? Why can't you just not pursue this religious lifestyle and still believe a lot of what you believed and just sort of reframe it.
Yeah. When you stop believing in God, did you stop believing in good and evil? No, that's after that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It didn't feel that abrupt to me. So I don't know. I see like, the way you're framing it. Yeah, it is abrupt, but I guess that's it being abrupt in that way is a way that resonates with me, and maybe it shouldn't with Mary because that's such a big part of her life, but I could see how it would for Philip Pullman writing about Mary from his own experience. And that means that it's, a flaw in the writing for sure.
Right.
But still, because I'm more similar to Philip Pullman than I am to Mary Malone, it still resonated with me, I guess.
Okay. I think that's part of what the criticisms I was seeing were, that it just, you hear Philip's voice and you don't hear Mary's voice, it feels like at times, This
is the most I ever felt being in any character's head. But then again, maybe that's just because I'm way too close in with Philip Pullman. So maybe that's just my experience on that. But yeah, it's that Philip Pullman thing, I feel like, where you can really feel the gears grinding.
Yeah.
For sure.
And the part where I thought that this was something that you in particular would... was it hard to leave the church? In one way it was, because everyone was so disappointed. Everyone from the Mother Superior to the priests to my parents, they were so upset and reproachful. I felt as if something they all passionately believed in depended on me carrying on with something I didn't. And I'm like, yeah, it sounds like Owen.
Yeah, and a lot of other people, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something that I feel like if there wasn't that caveat with Christianity about spread the gospel, it wouldn't maybe be as damaging as it is. Like, if people felt like just, live your own life and do the things that you need to do.
I disagree. I feel the opposite.
You feel the opposite, that spreading the gospel is the better part?
Yeah, I feel like one of the better parts of the gospel is the idea that you should try and be inclusive and care about how your doctrine affects other people.
I do not think those things are the same thing.
What do you mean?
Spreading the gospel and being inclusive and caring about people are not at all the same thing in my mind.
Okay, definitely not being
I'm
inclusive.
Thinking Inquisition when I'm
Right.
talking about spreading the gospel. Like, torture until you comply, kind of.
There's definitely other sides to it, and it can be terrible, but just what I mean is the thing that bothers me the most in the religious beliefs that I see, especially around where we live, is the fact that most people don't seem to really care about they believe that that you don't believe in what we believe in, you're going to hell, all this, and you believe that you're where you are only because someone told you about it and cared enough about you to help you, and yet you don't. On paper, you say that you want to like spread out to them and bring them into the fold, but in reality, you just want to keep them at arm's length and just kind of enjoy the fact that they're getting it wrong.
I'm really confused. I'm sorry.
Maybe I'm going off on a tangent.
I feel like you said one thing, and then when the way you talked about it completely contradicted what I thought you were intending to say. Because you said you thought that the good thing was to reach out to people, but then you made it sound like the reaching out is completely false.
Right, and that's what bothers me.
Okay, so
it's that they're supposed to be reaching out but aren't.
Okay. Yeah, like that's the thing, is like the reaching out, when it's about reaching out to people to like do good, that's not the same thing as spreading the gospel. And I feel like the spreading the gospel part is often taken as convert as many people as possible. And if you're not able to convert somebody, you cut them out of your life.
Yeah.
And that's frequently like, I had so many friends that their family straight up disowned them. And they just never saw them again.
Yeah.
And it was just, especially the ones that had that the most severely were Jehovah's Witnesses, because they have that whole shunning thing. That's a really, really big deal. So I had a couple of close friends when I was in Connecticut who just straight up never saw their family. And it was the kind of thing that they had been very dedicated to when they were teenagers, and then suddenly realized this is not right. And as soon as anything, like any sort of questioning crossed their lips, their family started to put the bricks down to build the wall between them. It was just, kind of an immediate thing.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's really sad how she, is just like, yeah, I left, and it's not some grand love story. I didn't marry that guy that I was with that night at dinner, because that's not what it was really about. And I still wound up being, kind of a solitary person. But
yeah.
I became my own person. Like, it's not this this movie happy ending or anything.
Yeah,
it's not a sad, depressing ending because she's content. But it's not a fairy book story ending.
I think that was part of what I liked about it, was that she winds up being with a few people. And it's not about like, oh, you'll find the one. It's just about experiencing things. It's not, because I feel like there's a way that people talk about like finding your soulmate that's almost like, what a religious person might call idolatrous. Like putting that on a pedestal. And she's like, no, that's not it either. It's just about living and taking things as they come, and sometimes they don't work out, and that's okay too. I found the part that I was talking about. Will anyone be better off if I go straight back to the hotel and say my prayers and confess to the priest and promise never to fall back into temptation again? Will anyone be the better for making me miserable? And the answer came back, no, no one will. There's no one to fret, no one to condemn, no one to bless me for being a good girl, no one to punish me for being wicked. Heaven was empty. I didn't know whether God had died or whether there never had been a God at all. Either way, I felt free and lonely, and I didn't know whether I was happy or unhappy, but something very strange had happened. So that's the part where I was just like, wait, what? Heaven was empty. Okay, that's a quick shift.
I can relate to that in the way that like you're living with all of this guilt that you're not being the kind of person that you want to be, and when you finally face that and ask yourself whether or not you really believe that there is something to judge you and make you feel like that guilt is justified, and you finally realize that you don't really believe that there is anything out there that's actually going to do it, and that's all been kind of something you've been telling yourself, not something that you've been feeling from outside of yourself.
Okay, that makes sense.
That actually bothers me a little less now, going through that again.
And then another thing that I thought was kind of weird was when I first saw you in your Oxford, Lyra said, you said one of the reasons you became a scientist was that you wouldn't have to think about good and evil. Did you think about them when you were a nun? No, which I find crazy. How do you be a nun and you don't think about good and evil?
Yeah, it's weird.
That doesn't make any sense to me at all.
But I think in a way it does, because she, as a nun, went into a non-spiritual field, and maybe that was her kind of, in her way then, retreating from that. Maybe. Is going into science, and even though on paper she's supposed to be thinking about these things, she's off doing this thing, telling herself that she's doing what she's supposed to be doing while never thinking about that at all. I think there are a lot of people who are, quote unquote, devout, who really don't think about right and wrong at all.
Okay. She said, no, but I knew what I should think. It was whatever the church taught me to think. And when I did science, I had to think about other things altogether, so I never had to think about them for myself at all. So I guess that's what you're saying. It's just a hard thing for me to comprehend. Like, that's the only reason that I could understand somebody becoming a nun, is thinking about good and evil and wanting to like be a force for good, and being like having a devotion to a being, but not thinking about good and evil is just like completely backwards to me. Like, how are you gonna, you know what I mean? I don't know. That's just crazy talk to me.
I think if you had asked her back then whether or not she believed in good and evil, in the broad way that she talks about right after this, of course she would have said yes. But I think it's different between, telling yourself on paper that you're believing and thinking and doing things for one reason, when in reality you're just kind of going through your day and sticking with the rut in your life, you know? And in my experience, that's what 90% of religion is it's just following the rules that you believe in for one reason or another, whether it's tradition or what.
Okay. And then Will asks, did you miss God? Yes, Mary said, terribly. And I still do. And what I miss most is the sense of being connected to the whole of the universe. I used to feel I was connected to God like that, and because he was there, I was connected to the whole of his creation. But if he's not there, then... And that's where that just sort of trails off. Mm-hmm. And we have that weird moment where she's talking about the boy feeding her the marzipan.
Right.
As Mary said that, Lyra felt something strange happen to her body. She felt as if she had been handed the key to a great house she hadn't known was there, a house that was somehow inside her, and she turned the key and felt other doors opening deep in the darkness and lights coming on.
Now, you were once a young girl who had sexual awakenings. How do you feel about that? Because for me, I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. This is very flowery and very odd and doesn't feel...
The thing that I just think... First of all, it wouldn't work for this story. And second of all, adults don't want to admit it, is that I started having sexual impulses and thoughts when I was like 8. It happens way earlier than when I ever started to like actually act on it. Do you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So that's always the thing with stuff like this, is the pretense that she never thought of it at all. It never even occurred to her until suddenly this story... But again, I can't decide if Pullman wants this to be a fairy tale or not. It feels like he does. So Lyra is going to like think about how it would be weird to be naked around Will, but not actually like really think about that, which is what I think would cause her to have this sort of reaction versus a story about marzipan. But it's because he wants Mary to be the one to awaken that in Lyra for the sake of the story.
Yeah, it's not great.
You know, it just doesn't really make sense. Like, I remember as a kid the weird things that would trigger me suddenly having like a sexual impulse or a thought. And it was never something that like made sense. It was always just a strange connection that didn't like... If I think back to, like, I'm trying to even think of one now, but it's so nonsensical that as an adult, I don't think that I could, like, put it together. You know what I mean?
Well, it should be remembered that you were, as an 8-year-old, a grade A pervert.
I got my period when I was 9 years old, so I was most definitely the earliest bloomer. Like, most girls get their period around 12 to, like, 15, and I wasn't even in the double digits yet. So I think it's safe to say that my hormones are a little bit more active than most ladies. So, you know, there's that, which is something that I definitely take into account with stories like this, you know, like, because, and also things like the way that Lyra was raised is really different.
She's around a lot of old dudes, never had any access to dirty magazines. Yeah, this scene more than anything else just made me think of that scene in Pleasantville.
Oh yeah,
when the mom has her
movie.
I like that movie a lot. It's weird. I don't know if I want to revisit it because it also explores race in a very weird way.
Yeah, it does.
But maybe it's fucking great. I don't know. But yeah, there's the part where the mom has the sexual awakening, and the mom is like 49 years old, but she lives in this Leave It to Beaver style 50s television sitcom universe, literally, where no one has thoughts like that until people from the outside world go, there's weirdly some connections between his Dark Materials and Pleasantville. When we finish this book, let's watch Pleasantville.
All right.
But yeah, the mom has sexual awakenings, and the tree outside of her bathroom window literally catches fire. It's pretty...
I forgot about that.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's just like the kind of... I mean, I just remember... because of the detached way that she's talking about, you know, disappointing people, but not really having her own, like, attachment to it so that she could see that she was hurting somebody. But, like, when it comes to, like, sexual impulses and awakenings and whatnot, I just remember, like, being 100% okay with what I was feeling and thinking, but knowing that other people wouldn't be. Like, And so I hid things, not because I was ashamed of them, but because I was like, I just don't want to deal with what people are going to say about this. Like, I had that pretty early on. And as I get older, I'm like, oh yeah, I understood slut shaming like way early, even though I didn't really like know, like get it. You know, I didn't have the life experience or the perspective about patriarchy and whatnot to like understand. You didn't know
it was a problem. You just knew it was a thing that people did.
Exactly.
Yeah. I guess I can relate to that.
So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of the way that was handled. You know, it just feels
it's one of those
super easy.
It's one of those moments where, and this chapter more than almost any other in every other respect is one of the ones where I least imagine this 45-year-old man smoking his pipe, writing it on his typewriter, but him typing about the little girl having her sexual awakening. I'm just like, yeah, this isn't why you wrote this book.
Well, it feels like it kind of is though, because like he has the whole preamble of, oh, Lyra woke up and she was naked and she felt weird about it, but then there were clothes there and she was clothed, and then she felt decent and she thought about being naked around Will and she blushed.
Right.
You know, there's that whole like, you know, oh, and then they saw their nakedness and they were ashamed.
Right. And that's exactly. Like, I feel like it's in here because it's part of the Bible.
Mm-hmm. But it doesn't feel
natural. And Philip Pullman definitely thinks that it's bullshit, but he probably wouldn't talk to you at dinner about it for hours about why he thinks it's bullshit. He would probably just like kind of offhandedly mention, that's weird, but I don't think he wants to explore it as thoroughly as he does. Feeling like you're supposed to be a certain way and fit into the world in a certain way because of religion.
Okay.
Because of faith.
So yeah, Mary Malone runs out of stories and they decide that they're going to go to sleep, and that's the end of the chapter.
Like, I'll think of more stories. I'll tell them about an old episode of All in the Family I saw a few years ago.
Oh, and meanwhile, the Mulefa have been talking to her about that there's some weird shit going on with a bunch of villages being attacked, and that they usually attack and like bail and go back out into the ocean for a while, but they've been attacking and then moving on to the next place and attacking, and so that's awesome.
It's a duck blur.
It's a duck blur?
That's a line from the Ducktales theme song.
It is?
Yeah. Life is like a hurricane here in Duckburg. Na 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 airplanes. It's a duck blur.
Is it really? It's a duck blur?
It's a very silly song.
Oh my god, I'm looking this up right now.
It's danger. I never even actually watched DuckTales. I have never seen a single episode of DuckTales.
I found it. DuckTales theme song. Oh, I forgot about this. God.
Can we do a dramatic reading of the Please do.
Okay. Life is like a hurricane here in Duckburg. Race cars, lasers, aeroplanes. It's a duck blur.
Let me get on some of this.
Might solve a mystery or rewrite history. That's the first verse. You want to do the chorus?
DuckTales. Ooh. Every day they're out there making DuckTales.
We need some more energy. Come on, pick it up.
Tales of daring, do bad and good, luck tales. Woo. When it seems they're headed for the final curtain, bold deduction never fails. That's for certain.
I hate that. I hate that you did that. Stop
the worst of messes become successes. DuckTales. Woo.
Is that the whole thing?
Oh no, there's more.
Man, I can't believe that this is so long.
Yeah. I mean, it's really clippy.
Danger lurks behind you. There's a stranger out to find you. What to do? Just grab onto some DuckTales.
Woo.
Every day they're out there making DuckTales. Woo.
I really want like Maurice LaMarche or someone to read this as Orson Welles.
The last lines are not ponytails or cottontails. No, DuckTales.
Gotcha.
Wow, this is amazing. I'm really glad we did this. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Yeah, thanks. That was weird.
We'll see you in a little bit.
Do we have anything else? We're not going to do we have iTunes reviews or anything?
I don't know. Let's see. Shall we? Why don't you vamp for a second?
Yeah. Okay, I can tell everyone about myself. The name's Owen Washington Hobbs. You can find me on Facebook. You can like the Facebook page for my comic book podcast with Maggie. It's called What's Going with Owen and Maggie. It's a mouthful. It's a duck blur.
Oh my God! Is that going to be a thing we say now?
Isn't it a great, stupid thing to say?
It's a duck blur.
Oh, I know what I would like to do. The reason I thought of that is there's a podcast called It's a Duck Blur that is, I believe, a husband and wife team, but I might be wrong on that. Maybe it's just random people doing a Ducktales podcast. And the reason I thought of it is they posted something about it on a page I follow, and their logo is just a regular, very minimalistic cartoon of a duck. Just like, white with little dot eyes, but he's wearing a little top hat.
A top hat.
Seriously, go right now, even if you don't want to listen to a podcast about DuckTales, and I never will just because I haven't watched that show. But go look at their awesome...
You've never watched an episode of DuckTales?
No, I just said that earlier. I watched, what's the sequel one? With the Batman guy?
With the Batman guy?
Yeah, it's fucking A.
We do not have any new reviews.
Well,
so
get to it, guys.
Yeah,
we're working very hard over here. What the fuck is that show called? He wears a purple.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, and
What's
he's got the
called?
mask. I don't remember. I'm gonna Google Duck Batman.
Yeah, people are screaming into their
right.
People have stopped listening. They're like, I don't come to this podcast to listen to them talk about Darkwing Duck. That's his fucking name.
So you watched that?
I watched that. Yeah, DuckTales was on like when I was either very, very little or before I was born.
Okay.
Because I am a young boy.
I used to love DuckTales. Oh my God.
Like everything I heard about it is great. Apparently it has an amazing video game.
Oh.
On the NES that was like one of the best NES games ever.
Huh. You'd think I would have played that. Yeah. I wonder if I did and I just don't remember it.
Yeah, it's apparently really good, but never played it because also never played an NES. I never had one. I've played one.
Yeah, I was mostly a Sega girl. All right, everybody.
Yeah, thank you
for reals
listening.
This time.
Yeah.
We love you. Yeah. Thank you for your
Amazon.
patience, for your love.
Amazon.com/
No.
Unspoiled.
No. That is not. Why do you do this?
Amazon.co.uk // unspoiled
guys,
with an exclamation
it's unspoiledpodcast.com/Amazon, Facebook.com/unspoiledpod, Twitter @unspoiledshow, Instagram @unspoiledpodcast, and toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.